Jesus at the center of it all. Jesus at the center of it all. From beginning to the end, it will always be, it's always been you, Jesus. Jesus. Jesus at the center of it all. Jesus at the center of it all. From beginning to the end, it will always be, it's always been you, Jesus. Jesus, nothing else matters. Nothing in this world will do. 'Cause Jesus, you're the center. Everything revolves around you. Jesus, you. Jesus, be the center of my life. Jesus, be the center of my life. From beginning to the end, it will always be, it's always been you, Jesus. Jesus, nothing else matters. Nothing in this world will do. 'Cause Jesus, you're the center. Everything revolves around you. Jesus, you. From my heart to the heavens, Jesus, be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. From my heart to the heavens, Jesus, be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. From my heart to the heavens, Jesus, be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. From my heart to the heavens, Jesus, be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. Jesus, be the center of our church. Jesus, be the center of our church. From beginning to the end, it will always be, it's always been you, Jesus. Jesus, oh Jesus. Jesus.
Our scripture is going to be Mark 8:18. You know, some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed, some people are ambidextrous. What's Bernie? So I think he's right-handed because you see both hands going with the bongos and the foot going with the tambourines. Pretty talented. So Mark 8:18. Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Pastor Jesse.
Happy Sabbath. I don't know why you came to church today. That sounded weird. That was a weird way to start it. I don't know why you came to church today. No, I don't know why you came to church today, but I was doing devotion this morning, and it was interesting. I was feeling really frustrated because I guess recently I'd felt like it just felt like a lot of work, and it felt like I wasn't really hearing a lot, and I don't know. It was really difficult. And I was just like, God, I don't know what's going on, and it just kind of hit me. I was like, I feel like I need to listen to something, and so I was on YouTube. I just typed in gospel, and this video came up, and it was this older African American lady, and they're singing. She's at a piano, and there's a whole crowd in the back. It's like a choir or something like that, except they're all sitting down. This group thing, and then there's the audience that you can't see. But anyways, she's there, and she's leading in like this, African American gospel, like, let's go, And she's talking about how she was sick and how she couldn't even pray, and she just sang. And so she was playing what she was saying to God, and it just hit me because what I saw in this woman was that she knew Jesus. And because she knew Jesus, it just flowed out of her life. And I guess what I had been realizing about my own life is I was feeling like I was trying to get all of the right things in place, and I'm trying to do all the right things, and I'm trying to get all this stuff for God, but I was struggling to actually know Him and actually like experience a love relationship with Him. And so it really changed the way that I don't know, it was just something that I really needed to hear. Maybe that's something you need to hear today, that it's not about what you know. It's not about it's not even about who you know of. It's about knowing Him and being in that love relationship with Him. And today, there's a couple things. First of all, we're trying something new this week. If you have a bulletin, inside the bulletin, there's sermon notes. We're trying something new. If you pull those out, you don't have to use them. If we have more, if anyone wants them, raise your hand or something like that. If we get more bulletins, sermon notes. We're going to try something I've never tried before because I want us to be able to remember. And as it turns out, we're talking about remembering today. So, we'll just try this out. If there's anyone who wants some notes, just raise your hands. I just see one right now, but one over here too. Right over here, Daryl. And right here. Today I want to talk about remembering. The title of the sermon is Reflections. And it's about remembering. It's about looking back at the past. Guys, it's the last day of 2015. I was just checking. Some of y'all are like, wow, that whole year, 2 years. No, pretty much, it's the last day of 2016, right? When did that happen? I don't know how much time you spend on Facebook, but if you're a millennial, you definitely spend way too much time on Facebook. And if you're older, you probably have experienced too much time on Facebook as well. But on Facebook, there's this kind of predominant feeling that this year has been a terrible year. And I don't know if I agree with that. I would say that there have been some pretty terrible things that have happened. But I think that how we look back at a year kind of more dictates how it affects us than what actually even happened. Let me just recap real quick. We're going to recap real quick. We're going to get to the sermon in a second, but I just want to recap the year. There was the Zika virus. Remember that? Terrorists in Europe. There's the migrant crisis. If you're like me and you're a nerd, then you know that there's a spaceship called Juno, and it entered Jupiter's orbit and sent us back some pretty cool pictures. There's the Rio Olympics. Do you even remember that happened? Because I was thinking that was in August, and I barely remember that happened. And along with the Rio Olympics, you had the angry Phelps face. Do you ever see that? He's just sitting there and he's mad. And the mannequin challenge, right? Some of y'all are going to be doing the mannequin challenge. You're going to be asleep right now. But you're just going to tell me you're doing the mannequin challenge. Okay, it's okay. I got you. The Broncos won the Super Bowl. It was the most boring Super Bowl I ever watched. We had Pokemon Go come out. Yeah? Pokemon Go. When that first came out, let me just share, my wife and I went out for a walk. We went out to a park. I was like, oh, this is cool. And we're walking by people, and I'm just going to be honest right now. they didn't look like people who would normally be in a park. And we're walking past them, and they're looking at their phones. I'm like, Pokemon Go? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's right. More community than I've ever experienced right there. There was a failed coup in Turkey. There was the Brexit. Everyone was freaking out about the Brexit. There was the fact that Cuba opened up, right? Cuba opened up to the rest of the world. And then there was this big, huge thing. And there's this thing called the popular vote. And the popular vote didn't win. And it was about this. Let me just tell you this. It was the worst, it was the most horrible thing that I'd ever seen. There was a organization that wanted to name a boat. And they had all this list of names, but then they had a place where you could put in your own vote. And the vote that won for this research vessel was Bodie McBoatface. And that won by a landslide. And they didn't name it Bodie McBoatface. I guess it was just telling what was going to happen later. That's not a political statement, but it happened, okay? But honestly, I barely remember it all. I mean, think back, all this stuff. Like, you barely remember, unless I said it, you probably wouldn't have remembered it, right? But what's that got to you this year? I mean, some of you may have had a child. You may have entered a new grade. You may have had a whole new, phase of life open up to you. You may have experienced more hardships and trials than you ever experienced. You may have experienced broken relationships. Maybe you feel more confident, whatever it is. But I just want to tell you something, and this sounds obvious, but the events of this past year are the reason that you're here in the way, in the spirit that you are today. And the events of the year before that, and the year before that, and the rest of your life, that your past tells you why you're here where you're at today. And you may feel more confident than you ever felt because of stuff that happened this year. You may feel less confident than you've ever felt because of stuff that happened this year. You may feel like nothing changed, but you're here because of the past, right? And I just want to tell you this. We're about to open up the Bible, but I just want to say this, that the way that we look at our past dictates how it affects our present. The way that we look at our past dictates how it affects our present. And even more so, the way that we look back at what God has done in our lives affects how we face things like trials and hardship and even joy and new experiences. How we look back at how God has worked in our life directly affects how we approach those things. So that's what I want to talk about today. We're going to talk about three things that I think that are kind of harmful, that the way that we treat the past, three harmful ways we treat the past, but then there's one specific thing that God calls us to do. So I want to talk about that. So let's pray. Let's get to it. Lord, I want to thank you so much for today. It's the last day of 2016. And it's funny because in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't mean a lot. But for us, God, there's so many people who have gone through a lot this year. And we just thank you that you are a good God that has guided us this far. And we're excited to find out more about you in this coming year. In your name, amen. Thank you for the music, by the way, Paris and Lindsay and Bernie and Matt and Vin. It's amazing to be able to worship, right? We get to have that privilege, and it's fun. Open up your Bibles to Genesis. We're going to be in Genesis 19 just for the first section here. Genesis 19. And I want to talk about, again, three ways we treat the past that I think ends up being harmful to us. And where we're going to start is in Genesis 19. And let me give you the context for it. The context is there's this guy named Lot. And Lot is the nephew of a man named Abraham. Abraham was a guy that God called and said, hey, listen, I want you to leave everything. I want to leave your home. And I want you to come out, and I want you to follow me to the place that I'm going to lead you to. And so he does that, and Abraham takes his nephew Lot with him. Now, they finally settle in this land, but over time, Lot says to Abraham, hey, listen, I think it's time for us to go our separate ways. I think it's time for us to go our separate ways. We have too much stuff. My servants are getting into arguments with your servants because of land issues and all this stuff. So I think it's time to go our separate ways. So Abraham says, okay, I don't want that to be what happens, but I see that it needs to happen. So they go their separate ways. And Lot goes to a place called Sodom. And when Lot goes there, they settle there, him and his family. And that's where we pick up the story because, and actually, let me just give you one more bit. God shows up at Abraham's camp. And God is trying to do something in Abraham's life. But at the end of that, after he talks to Abraham about that, he says to Abraham, hey, listen, I'm going to go to Sodom. Sodom has become such a messed up place and they're affecting people around them, that the city's going to be destroyed. And so, as a result, Abraham's like, no, if there's just one righteous person, would you save it? And God says, okay. So he goes and finds Lot. And these two angels show up at Lot's house. And this is where we pick up the story. We're going to be in verse 15. Genesis 19, verse 15. It says, as morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But Lot lingered. So the angels seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand. The Lord was being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills. So this is what the angel says to them. Get out of here. Don't look back. And so they leave, and we're going to pick it up in verse 23. Verse 23, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Verse 25, and he overthrew these cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. Verse 26, but Lot's wife behind him looked back, and then she became a pillar of salt. And it's interesting because some of you may have heard this story before, but that's the basic story. They're all running. Lot's wife turns around, looks back, pillar of salt. And people have tried to explain it. Why? Why in the world does she turn into a pillar of salt? There's speculation that when she turned around, she saw she may have seen God's presence, she may have whatever, and she turns into a pillar of salt, but really no one knows. Everyone's just speculating. And I was curious, I'm more concerned, as I read that, I was more concerned with why does God say don't look back? I'm not so much concerned with why she turns into a pillar of salt, but why does God say don't look back? And as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to look something up here. So I look up the Hebrew word, the original language, the Hebrew word for look. The Hebrew word for look, if you're keeping notes here you go. The Hebrew word for look is nabat. It's N-A-B-A-T. Nabat. And the word means look, but it's not the only Hebrew word for look. And it's interesting because there's a point that it's trying to get across, because it's saying that she looked back. There's almost this this feeling that it's trying to tell you, this idea, and it's that she is gazing back. She is looking back almost regretfully. She is looking back in this way that she almost misses what is back there. And it's interesting because if you really think about it, if you're this woman, this is a place where you've put your roots down. You've invested there. If you think about it, they had Lot and his wife had lived with Abraham. They lived in tents. They would wander places. They would set up tents. They would all live there. But now Lot and his wife had moved to a city, so they had a home. They had people that they knew. This is a place where she had invested. She had given her time. When she walked down the street, she probably knew people. This is a place that she had invested. And now all of a sudden, it's all getting ripped away from her. It's all getting taken away from her. And maybe you feel like that today. Maybe you feel like the rug's getting pulled out from under you. That the places in your life where you used to feel confident, the places in your life where you used to feel security and comfort and fulfillment and all of these things, that those places in your life are now getting ripped out from under you. And now all of a sudden, the very place in your life that you thought would give you security are now the places you're the most insecure. Maybe you feel like everything is just falling apart. That's what she felt like. And she turns around. And it's interesting because when she turns around and she looks back, what she's thinking, what she's doing when she looks back is she's thinking that I wish that my past, I wish that where I was could be where I am now. I wish that my past could be my present. And when she does that, she turns into a pillar of salt. Maybe the people that you always thought would be there are now the very people that have left. Maybe friends have gotten farther away. And you're looking back and you're thinking, if I could just be back there. If I could just be back where I was. We wish that life would go back a lot. It's interesting because my friend Eric is here today. He's I grew up with him. He's like my brother. And we'll sit there and we'll like think back to things that happened. We can't say everything in the presence of other people because there's just, statute of limitations. A lot of it's over, but not some of them. But we'll sit back and we'll think back about all these things. And it's fun. It's fun to reminisce, right? It's fun to look back and think like, man, that was a lot of fun. But I think there's more serious places in our life that we think back to. Where I remember when I enjoyed this place in my life. I remember when these places where I had security and I had a foundation and I had everything that I thought I wanted. And now all of a sudden all of that's fallen apart. And now I'm in a place where all of a sudden I don't have anything I used to have. And now I'm looking back at it thinking if I could just be back there. And that's what Lot's wife does. But it's so interesting because when she looks back, she turns into a pillar of salt. She gets paralyzed. I think the first way to treat the past is to stop looking back. And that sounds weird. You're like, wait, hold on. I'm supposed to remember the past, though. No, there's a different connotation here. She's not just looking back like, oh yeah, I remember that. She's looking back wishing she was there. But what she forgets, though, is that the very place that she was would have led to her being destroyed. And what she also forgets is that God has now taken her out of that place that could have destroyed her and put her on the path to deliverance. That's what she forgot. And what's so interesting is she looks back, forgetting that she's on the path to deliverance, forgetting that God has put you on the path to becoming a better person, to becoming more like Him, to actually learning about Him, to actually having a heart relationship with Him that can change your life. God has put you on that path, but so often I'm looking back, thinking if I could just be there, I missed that. And what happens, though, is she looks back and is paralyzed. And that's the interesting thing about when we look back like that, when we look back regretfully or wishing, is that it paralyzes us. We end up stuck between the unknown of what could come and the past we can't go back to. And the funny part is, I don't even think we have to like our past to want to be back there. Because I think that sometimes the fear of the future is scarier than the pain of the past. Sometimes the fear of the future is scarier than the pain of the past. So you may not even really be wishing you were back there, but you would rather be there than step forward into an unknown situation where you don't know where God is going to take you. And that's where she gets stuck in. And that's the problem with looking back. When we look back regretfully, wishing, hoping that everything could be different than where we're at now, we get stuck in that middle ground. We're not even in the present. We're not moving forward, but we can't go back. And then we get stuck there. And then that's the first problem with how we treat the past, but that's not the only way. If you open up your Bibles to Mark, maybe in Mark chapter 8, we're going to pretty much stay there for the rest of the sermon here. But Mark 8, and I'm going to go through this part here, and I'm not going to give you a ton of context because we're going to go back later. But I'm going to read, I'm going to start in verse 14, and we'll read through verse 21 just so you understand what's happening. And then I want to show us the second thing that ends up being harmful to us with how we treat our past. So verse 14 of chapter 8 in Mark. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. This is the disciples and Jesus. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they only had one loaf with them in the boat. And Jesus cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven. Beware of the yeast is what it is. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. So Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Don't you perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see? Having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And Jesus said to them, do you not yet understand? Jesus is trying to teach the disciples a lesson. He's trying to teach them that, listen, the Pharisees, the people, the religious people, they have something. They have a message that if you just take a little bit of in your life, it's going to mess you up. Yeast, right? Just a little bit. Put into a little bit of bread. You didn't know bread exploded, did you? No, it affects the whole entire thing just a little bit. And what's so interesting is that Jesus uses the term yeast. Even the Israelites back in the day, they had to eat unleavened bread. They had to eat bread that didn't have any yeast in it. And that's purposeful. God is saying that because just a little bit of something can take over your entire life. And Jesus, just before this, he's had an experience with the Pharisees. And we're going to go back to that. But he's had an experience with the Pharisees. And so he's saying to the disciples, listen, the Pharisees are legalistic. They think you have to do stuff, all these crazy rules. I want you to be careful of that. Because just a little bit of it in your life will absolutely mess you up. Because think about it. If I think that I have to do a little bit to get to God, just a little bit, I have to clear up this part of my life so I can get to God, then what happens when I get that cleared up? Well, then I realize I have more problems on this side, so I got to clear those up. And then after I do that, I got to clear up the other side. And all of a sudden it balloons into this massive problem because I realize that I am not anywhere close to getting to God. But what God says, Jesus says, is I have come the distance. I have already come this far. Jesus literally in front of his disciples saying, I'm here. And the Pharisees don't see him. And they're saying, hey, you really got to do all of these different tasks in order to clear yourself up for God. And Jesus is like, I'm literally right here saying you don't have to. And so Jesus is saying this to them. But what's interesting is what the disciples do. Because they say this, we don't have any bread. Well, that's a really random tangent. But it's because Jesus is trying to teach them something. He's trying to show them something that's way beyond what they can even understand. But when they hear the word yeast, they're like, what's he talking about? And they look around and they realize they only have one loaf of bread. They realize they have only a loaf of bread. They're on a 4-hour journey across the lake on a boat. So what naturally happens? They're like, as soon as they see that, then all of a sudden they forget what Jesus said, and they're like, hey, Peter, you were supposed to get the bread. Why'd you only bring one piece of bread? Peter's like, no, it's not my fault. Andrew was supposed to bring it. And all of a sudden they're blaming each other and fighting over the fact, like, now we don't have any food. And Jesus is over here frustrated. He starts to get a little ticked off, and he's like, oh my goodness. These people, Jesus can say, oh my goodness, because he's Jesus. And Jesus said to him, this is in verse 17, and Jesus says to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? And then he goes, that's the beginning of 9 questions, 9 straight questions. Jesus doesn't stop asking questions until he's finished these 9. He says, and Jesus, aware of this, says, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see? Having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember? Then he goes on and says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said 12. And the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said to him 7. 9 questions, he just goes off on them. But it's interesting because if you look at what he's trying to say, this is the second way. Mark 8, verse 18. Mark 8, verse 14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. The second way that we treat our past that ends up being harmful to us is we forget. The second way to treat the past is to stop forgetting. And it's interesting because the disciples have forgotten to bring bread. And because they've forgotten to bring bread, when Jesus points out, he's trying to teach them something, all of a sudden they look around and they realize that they lack something. All of a sudden there's a void in their life. We don't have any bread. And that void all of a sudden takes precedence, right? They can't understand what Jesus is trying to say because now their present has a problem. They don't have bread. What are they going to do for food? How is this going to work out? Because they're starving, they're hungry, right? But Jesus is frustrated because he's trying to teach them something way bigger, but then he points out 2 things. He goes, there were 5,000 people, and there were 5 loaves of bread. Okay? 5 loaves of bread in one basket. After that was all done, after all the people ate, how many pieces did you pick up? You picked up 12 baskets full of pieces. When there was 4,000 people and there was only 7 loaves, how many baskets did you pick up? 7. Jesus is going, he's like, listen, you're worried about your present, but you forget what's crazy about this story is this is in Mark 8, right? Literally, 4 verses earlier is the end of a story that we've just referenced. That's when Jesus feeds the 4,000. This was like an hour ago. Jesus has just fed 4,000 people, and they're arguing over a loaf of bread because they forgot what God had done. And when we forget what God has done in our lives, it takes away the power of faith. Because when I forget that He's done, when I forget anything that He's done, and now all of a sudden I have to deal with the present because I have nothing to fall back on. When I forget what God has done, now all of a sudden the present problem, the present void in my life takes precedence because I don't remember the fact that He's filled it and overflowed. And that's what's incredible. They forget. They forget what God has done. And they disconnect themselves from the most powerful thing that they could have had, the one that provided for them. All of a sudden, I think when we forget what God has done, it becomes all about me and how I can work out my current situation. All about me and how I can work out what's going on in my life. But God's like, I've already provided. I've already done it. I've already come through. I've already done more than you could ever imagine. But you've forgotten. And now you've disconnected yourself from the power of faith, from the power of believing that I'm capable of it. And that's the second way. And then the third way, and this one is the most, I think, disappointing to me. And I'm guilty of it. And that's the problem. We're in Mark 8 still, and we just go back a few verses to verse 11. And this is why Jesus is ticked off in the story we just read. Because in verse 11 it says, the Pharisees came to him and began to argue, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And in verse 12 it says, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. If you just read that as a standalone, you can be like, wait, why doesn't Jesus want to show them? Let me just tell you something here. Jesus, in the book of Mark alone, up until this point, had healed people 9 separate times. Okay? And then 2 other times, he healed an unknown amount of people at 2 different events, right? So he's healed 9 specific people that we know of, and probably a lot more. But not only that, Jesus walks on water. Not only that, Jesus raises a girl from the dead. Not only that, Jesus feeds 9,000 people with 12 loaves of bread and a few fish. And they're asking for signs. They're asking for signs. The sign is there. Jesus had done 15 separate miracles up until this point. 15 separate points in time that he did miracles. Not even related to like how many people he affected, just 15 separate times. And he affected thousands of people. And they're asking him, hey, you going to show us your God? And Jesus, that's why it says he sighs deeply. Because he's just sad. I can't give you a sign. That's why he says that. It's not that he hasn't given them signs. He's just like, I can't give you a sign that you'll ever accept. But what got me is why don't they see it? Because if you know these Pharisees, they are students of the past. They look back, and it's interesting. They knew all of these incredible stories. The stories that they read about and that they would tell other people about. God parted a Red Sea. He gave them food that fell from heaven. He gave them water out of a rock. He defeated so many enemies. An earthquake took down a city after they walked around it 13 times. Okay? This is really crazy stuff out of nowhere. And they had read this. So why don't they notice when Jesus shows up? I think it was because they had gotten stuck on something. And this is the third way to treat the past is to stop memorializing it. And this is what I mean by that. The Pharisees had looked at, up until this point, let me just show you. The Pharisees knew up until this point about, let's see, this much text. They had studied it. They knew it. But when Jesus shows up, let's see, in about this much of text, they don't see him. Because they were looking back at this, and they were stuck there. They were looking back at that. And it's so interesting because what they have done is they have seen all of the incredible things that God has done. And they're thinking, wow, what an incredible God that has saved our people, has brought us out of slavery, who's done all these incredible things. And then what they did with this God is they put him in a box, put him on a pedestal, and visited him from time to time. And said, hey, look at what God did. But then they put him in this box that meant that he couldn't do anything today. They had memorialized what he had done, and so it no longer had an effect in their present. And we do that. Sometimes God has come through for me in the past, and I can look back and see it. But then I come to my current situation, and I'm like, but this one's different. Last time, God provided. Last time, we had to get out of an airport because we didn't have any money, my wife and I, right? But this time, I don't know. I don't know if God can really find us what we're looking for. I don't know if God really can provide because it's different. This time, I don't know if I've had the faith that I should have had coming up to this point. This time, it's just not the same circumstance. Last time, though, God came through. When we memorialize the past, we pretty much state that what God has done has no effect on what he will do. Meaning that God is in a box over there, and he has no relevancy to my today. We do it in churches. I've seen it in so many churches. You know, God really came through when we built our building. Okay, you have 14 people in your church. No, God came through when we built our building. Why isn't he coming through today? God came through when he built our building. Hey, why don't millennials, I hear this question all the time, why don't millennials want to come to church? It's because God isn't real to them. Why isn't God real to them? Because we're doing stuff that worked 100 years ago and still doing them. What if God legitimately did work 100 years ago, doing whatever we did 100 years ago, but what if he's doing something different today? Are we okay with that? Are we going to stop memorializing him, putting what he's done in a box, put it on this high pedestal and say, that's my God up there? Okay, why do you feel broken and hurting, and why do you feel like nothing can help you? Well, no, but my God, he's up there and he did all this cool stuff. Why isn't anyone coming to your church? He did cool stuff. And that's where the Pharisees were. God had done incredible things, but now God is literally right in front of them and they can't see him. Because they have put him in a box. I think actually more so, they put him in a coffin, buried him, visited the tomb from now and then. It was like, this is a cool God. This is a powerful God. But what's interesting is that Jesus did die, but then he rose, and he's alive today, and he has power in your life today, and he can change your life today. That's the God I believe in. He's not in a box on a pedestal. He's here with us. His Spirit is here with us. His Spirit is alive and can be alive in your life. So then we come to this last thing. How are we supposed to treat the past? How are we actually supposed to do it? Mark 8, verse 18. This is what Jesus says to his disciples. Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? So there's these three things that we do. We look back at places in our life that we wish we could have been, we wish we still could be in, and we then get stuck, paralyzed in between what happened and what God is going to continue to do. And all of a sudden, we're stuck in this place where we can't really move because we want what happened to still be happening. And we're afraid of the future because the pain of our past is easier to deal with. And then the second thing we do is we forget what God has done, and therefore we lose the power of acknowledging that he has done it and he can continue to do it. And then the third thing is we memorialize and we put him on a pedestal and believe that what he did in the past can't happen today. That what he did in the past was the biggest thing he'll ever do. Back then were the glory days. What if I told you that God has the desire to make your days from now on even more glorious than they used to be? No matter your age, no matter where you're at in life. But then there's this last thing that God tells us to do. God asks this question. He uses this word so many times. He says, do you not remember? And it's interesting because I'm sure some of you are asking the question, but you said not to look back. But it's different because I think there's two parts to remembering. We have to reflect on the events that occurred. Reflect on the fact that God has come through in your life. Maybe you're struggling to see where. Maybe you're struggling to see what. But I can tell you this, that if you sit down and look back at your past and look for places where God has come through, you'll find them. I'm only here today because God has come through for me. So we have to look back. We have to look back at what he's done. We have to see, we have to reflect on what's happened. Because if we forget that, we end up being like the disciples and missing out on what he could do today. But that's the second part of remembering, is that what has happened, the God that did things back then, has relevancy today. Remembering does nothing if it has no purpose in the present. And that's what God has called you to do. He's called me to do. He's called us to remember. Remember what he's done so that I can know that he will come through. Know that he died for me, and so I am made new. Know that he saved me, so now I can live in new life. That's the God that we believe in. That's why he's called us to remember. Your current circumstance is not bigger than his capability to deal with it. That's what he's called us to do, is to remember. Do you not remember? I want to encourage us today to use what God has done to believe what he will do. Let me say that one more time. To use what God has done to believe in what he will do. If you've got to sit down and write it down, if you've got to look back and write out all this stuff that's happened down, I'm sure you're going to find way more stuff than you ever thought actually happened. But don't stop there, because you may be going through trials. You may be about to experience a trial. You may be in places where I just feel spiritually dead. I feel like I don't know where God is or what he's doing. Write it down. Write what he has done down. And then believe in that God. Believe in that God and his power for your today. Remember what he has done and use that remembering to believe for today. Amen.
Are you hurting and broken within, overwhelmed by the weight of your sin? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's Christ. Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason to wait. Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, what a Savior! Isn't He wonderful? Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Bow down before Him, for He is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Oh, what a Savior! Isn't He wonderful? Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Bow down before Him, for He is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah, Christ is risen. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ.
I want to ask everyone to close their eyes. I think God has a special plan in store for you this year. It's not done today. It wasn't done yesterday. It wasn't done a year ago. He's got a plan for you. He's got exciting things coming for you. I don't just say that just because, let's all have this good feeling. But I truly believe that God has incredible things in store for you. But I also know that some of us are fighting our past, or fighting the memories, or fighting stuff that is keeping us from moving forward. I just want to ask you right now, if you're someone, I want everyone's eyes closed, that if you were someone right now that is running from their past and is seeking to be free from it, if you would just raise your hand. Raise your hand. Let Jesus come into your heart. If you're someone right now who is struggling with the future, what's going to come? What's going to happen? I'm worried. I don't know what to do. Just raise your hand. God, we want to come to your altar today knowing that you are powerful and that you are good and you are loving and that nothing we could do could separate ourselves from you. Nothing could separate us from you. Neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor demons, nor nothing in this world could separate us from you. And God, sometimes some of us are worried. Some of us are dealing with stuff in our past that we can't let go of. And some of us are worried about what's going to come. But God, you are our present. You are our future. You are our past. You are in all of it. And nothing that we could do could change it. But God, you can come through and you can give us peace. You can give us peace in the midst of all of the trials. You can give us peace in the midst of all of the hardships, all of the frightening things that we may be going through. So God, whatever you can do, we want to believe it. We don't want to just imagine that you stopped sometime a long time ago, but that you can have power in our today. We thank you, Lord. We thank you so much. In your name, amen.
To the altar, the Father's arms are